Uh, right. So, welcome back. It's been a week's break. Last week we could not do this session, but we'll take it from last week now. So today's session, as I had said, it is on Jyotisha. Okay, so and it is more of an astronomical perspective than what we popularly hear nowadays in the contemporary world, where Jyotisha is always astrology, right? So we will start with this topic, and before we start, as usual, let's get into a quick questionnaire to understand where you are in the in terms of knowing the field. So let's play KBJ, and you would have guessed what's the J in there for. Okay, so yes, let's start. So the first one, have you heard an astronomical perspective of Jyotisha before? I mean, other than horoscopes and anything else about future telling, fortune telling, etc. Have you ever heard of an astronomical perspective? It's an yes or no. Could key in your answer in the chat. We uh, No, okay, that's good. That's good. So that the session will do the justice for you today then. Yes, of course, Rahul. Yeah, and yeah, so we will quickly move on. We have a lot more things. So if you are answering, do it fast. Okay, what does Jyotisha primarily refer to in ancient Indian context? Astronomy, astrology, timekeeping, all of the above. Again, I'm not giving you any answers here, wherever applicable. Just trying to understand what you feel about it. D, all of the above. Astronomy, astrology, timekeeping. Yes, it is all of the above. We'll go through how over the course of the session today. Next, which of this monument is primarily associated with Jyotisha or astronomy? Right? There's Brihadeshwara Temple, Taj Mahal, Jantar Mantar, Someshwara Temple. Jantar Mantar. C. Yes. So, in a sense, all four options have some relation to interpreting Jyotisha or astronomy, astronomical significance in terms of their construction. But Jantar Mantar is primarily dedicated to astronomy. So, yeah, it's Jantar Mantar. The final one, which of the following field is close sibling of Jyotisha? Dance and music, mathematics, economics, medicine. Medicine. Interesting. Mathematics. Yes. So, I mean, because Indian knowledge systems are interdisciplinary, one will contribute to others. In a sense, if we have to sit and argue and justify stuff, yes, we can argue for dance and music. We can argue for economics as well as for medicine. But the closer sibling is the mathematics. We'll see how. Right? Let's okay. That's a good attempt from all of you who participated. Thank you, and let's move on. So, what do we do in today's session here? So, one, we'll see Jyotisha as a Vedanga. What does that mean? This is the IKS relation to Jyotisha, right? And the threefold Jyotisha, we'll see what is it. Evolution, over the discussion, we'll see how the Jyotisha has evolved and why, right? Jyotisha in our day-to-day life, we'll see a couple of examples. We'll do one simple example that you can also do after the session. I'll do it during the session for one of it. So we'll see how it is there. And we will explore four. There are like a lot of works, but I've picked up the four important that have had an impact on me, at least during the course of the time I've been studying Jyotisha, right? So then we will have a quick run through on some of the astronomical monuments and the instruments that are used in our Jyotisha system, right? So at the end of the session, I will try to probably, I mean, you will understand the celestial connection, that is You will see how our sky is important. Then we'll see about the timekeeping and its significance, how astronomy and culture are intertwined, right? Mathematics, as in the questionnaire I talked about, mathematics is a very close sibling for the evolution and to understand Jyotisha, the backbone. And we will eventually learn about the great minds, exploring the 4 works that I talked about, and the depth of their research. The timing of that work and the depth of the concepts will be mind-boggling, right? So let's start. So Jyotisha and IKS. What is the relation now? So with, like in every session, we pick up a field or a work and we map it to how it is contributing to Indian knowledge system, right? So from our first session, we had discussed about an IKS corpus, right? Of which, where are we talking about is the 14 Vidyasthanas, the Chaturdasha Vidyasthanas. Among the Chaturdasha Vidyasthanas, the first set is the 4 Vedas, and there were 6 Vedangas that we discussed about, right? So what are Vedangas? Vedangas are like an auxiliary disciplines for Vedas. They help to understand what the Vedas wants to convey. So for example, if Shiksha, Nirukta, Chandas are contributing to understanding the literature in terms of how the phonetics works, what is the etymology of each word in the verses, and how it is to be recited as part of Chandas, right? So Jyotisha comes where is what we will see now, right? So in a lot of Vedic verses, we have seen that there are different rituals that the Vedic texts prescribe, right? So to do a certain ritual in a way, the procedural aspect of it. But what is important among all this is about the timing of it, right? So for example, Vedic literature talks about something called Darsha Purnamasabhyam Yajeta, which means some yajnas that are to be done on Darsha Purnima is Amavasya and Purnima, right? The new moon and the full moon day, right? Certain rituals or yajnas to be done on new moon and full moon day, they prescribe, right? So now, how do you understand when is a full moon? What is a full moon? When is it going to come? If you are going to perform a ritual, you need preparedness. So you need to in advance understand when and how it is coming, right? So it is about timing, right? So eventually, how the initial literature of Jyotisha started is with a text, I mean the derivative of Vedas prescribing the timing of the rituals, right? So with that, what happens is eventually it became so, I mean the discipline went into so much of depth that it was a science by itself. Eventually we will see that once we start exploring some works. So also what the ancient works talks about a person, right, in a day-to-day life, any person, any individual, what is a characteristic with reference to Jyotisha, right? So the literature talks about something like Tasmaditam Kala Vidhana Shastram Yo Jyotisham Veda Saveda Yajnan. So one who understands Jyotisha can do a timely, meaningful work, not just a ritual, right? So he understands the importance of doing a timely work, right? A work that is done out of the time frame is meaningless, right? That's how the ritual and timing came into the day-to-day life. The importance of timing a day, timing any work in a day or a night is how Jyotisha evolved, right? So the literature also talks about an individual studying Jyotisha such that they understand the meaning of time, right? So it occupies among Vedangas, it occupies a special place in a sense that it is almost compared to the crown jewel of the Chaturdasha Vidyasthanas among Vedangas, right? Why is that? Because the literature repeatedly talks about the timing, importance of timing. They go to an extent saying A small here and there on the ritual procedure is fine, but the timing, if got wrong, the entire ritual that the Vedic text prescribed goes meaningless. That's how the Jyotisha's importance had been held high among the Vedangas, right? So what started as a timing ritual, right, which eventually started becoming a field of knowledge. Why? Important because why? One, the Vedic text talks about the time and also talked about the directions, right? How it made people aware of the directions is it prescribed building Vedic altar, I mean the Yagna altars, right, in a specific direction, cardinal direction. North, south, east, west, the cardinal directions that we talk about. So it talked about building a yagna mantapa in a particular direction. So you also need to study about the directions now, which is also Jyotisha. How did it translate into real world implementation? Of that time, what was the biggest economy driver was agriculture and trade, right? So agriculture depends severely on weather, right? So predicting weather, predicting the timing of different seasons eventually, right? That's how the Jyotisha evolved into timing the period of our lives, right? And what was important for a trade? If you have to go to farther places and trade with other people, you need to know about the directions. Navigational aspect came again, and those navigation was fixed through cardinal directions. And what contributed to that is Jyotisha. How? We will see in a moment, right? So what we see in plain text as Vedic text prescribing it to build a altar and to talk about timing of a specific ritual, translated to timing and predicting the weathers, predicting the cycle of seasons, predicting and getting a in-depth knowledge about navigation also, right? So that's how Jyotisha and IKS started evolving in terms of that, right? So let's get into now specifically getting one second. Yeah, defining Jyotisha. Now, if we are keep on talking about Kala Vidhana or timekeeping, why was it called Jyotisha altogether? It could have been conventionally called Kala Vidhana Shastra or Kala Shastra, right? Why was it called Jyotisha? Any guesses? Any guesses among the participants? If you see the word Jyotisha, the answer starts trickling from there, right? So Jyotisha, the root word Jyotish in Sanskrit is about light, right? Light, or to extending it a little further, luminous body. How is timekeeping, light and luminous body are relating to each other now? What was the source of timekeeping? Was about the bright objects in our sky, right? So people started observing a pattern of movement of bright objects in the sky and started predicting and started formulating a time capsule around these patterns, right? So what happened was, what are some of the luminous objects in the sky? Can you name a few? Forget about there was no electricity, so electrical bulbs and electrification is out of order, right? We are talking about natural luminous bodies in the sky. What were they? Sun, moon, pole star, yes, right? So sun, obviously, stars, yes, yeah, sun. Then the moon in the night. When it was day, we had all the time we had sun, right? During night, we had a lot more sources, one prominent being the moon, right? Then the stars, right? So stars there and planets, right? So though we have like these four broad categories, the ancients had two categories, right? So one is graha and one is nakshatra, right? So sun, moon, if we think about our navagrahas, right? Sun and moon are also part of grahas. Now you could come back and say how dumb the people were. I mean, they did not understand the differentiation of a star and a planet, and No, the interpretations are different. You have to go and look at the etymology of how these evolved. For how Graha and Nakshatras are defined is, Graha is something that kept moving in the sky. Nakshatra is something that were static in the sky. That's all the meaning of Graha and Nakshatras came in. So sun and moon were moving, right? So they were part of the modern definition of a Graha differs from what the definition of Graha was of that times, right? So when they differentiated between Graha and Nakshatra, everything that were moving, they in the backdrop of that is static, which is Nakshatra, they started formulating time, right? How we will see as we proceed towards the session, through the session, right? So why did they adapt Jyotisha and not something called Kalavidana Shastra? They took the root basis of how the timing and how the navigational aspects were taken, that is through the luminous objects in the skies, whether it is during day or night, right? Now, what was Kalavidana Shastra initially, which is about timekeeping, right? Slowly became, people started correlating the patterns, right? And started labeling them as Shubha and Ashubha Kala, right? So something started where people correlated the movement of the grahas among the nakshatras, right? And the particular time of the movement and particular alignment of particular grahas, or whether it is Surya, Chandra, or Rahu, Buddha, Ketu, right? All other grahas with the nakshatras or the nakshatra punja or the constellations, right? With respect to that, people started defining certain the good times and the bad times. How did they would have not randomly defined it. They would have observed a lot of patterns and said a particular alignment where the moon in a particular constellation contributes to certain good time or a bad time. How? Because they had observed a pattern of that happening again and again. And the scientific reasons further came into the later part of the evolution of Jyotisha, but they understood that there was a pattern. Certain alignments contributed to Shubha Kala and certain alignment contributed to Ashubha Kala. Now, when you know this is there, you can also start predicting when are these going to happen if there is a circular pattern, right? So that's how we had three sets of threefold Jyotisha. These are three different categories under which Jyotisha is studied, right? One is called Siddhanta, right? This is the astronomical aspect of Jyotisha, right? Which is completely hidden in the current times, right? So what we attribute to modern astronomy of Western civilizations, right? So a lot of evolved astronomy was and is there in the Siddhanta part of the Jyotisha, right? And it in turn goes into Ganita and Gola, right? Which is mathematics and astronomy, or Gola is a complete generic term for anything that is celestial. It can include all the celestial objects, including Earth, right? So then there was Samhita. Samhita is a collection, or it is an encyclopedic work where you are correlating whatever predictions that I was talking about a moment back. Samhita starts to do that, right? So we'll see a sample work in terms of Bruhat Samhita of Varahamira at the end of the session. What did it talk about? What the Siddhantas talk about? What the Samhitas talk about? Hora is the actual thing that is prominent in today's life. When we say Jyotisha as astrology, we are talking a lot about the Hora Shastra, right? Not the Siddhanta or Samhita. It is partly Samhita also, but a lot of it has to do with Hora. That is Jataka, Prashna, right? The Samhita, there is another interpretation where Siddhanta is astronomy, that is fixed. There's nothing there. Samhita talks also about astronomy, but it talks broadly about the astrological aspects of a broader sense. That is, it talks about the astrology or fortune of a land, or astrology or fortune of a group of people, or a particular part of the land, right? Whereas the Hora Shastras talks specifically about an individual and their family and how the individual's life is going to be, right? So what we do in our current, what is the current perception of Jyotisha as astrology is more to do with the Hora Shastra, because people are influenced by fortune telling, to know about their future, to know about how it is going to be there. That's how the Siddhanta and the half of the Samhita tradition was took a backseat, right? Now, so this is what the threefold. So when someone talks Jyotisha, it does not just mean astrology, right? It has the three components, one of which is a predominant astronomical concept as well. And it is not just superficial. We will see in one of the Siddhanta, popular Siddhanta work, at how depth the astronomy goes in terms of our Jyotisha works, right? Right. Next, so let's quickly talk. We talked about the threefold now. Let's quickly associate two of them. One, we will pick up the astronomical thing and how did people bring it to our day-to-day life, right? So that's we'll quickly take one popular example, right? How many of you know how do you find the Rashi, right? If someone is born, you go to a Jyotishi or an Acharya, right? And what does an Acharya ask you to write the horoscope? What are the three things that people, the Jyotishi or the Acharya asks you? Any inputs? Time. What else? Place. Perfect. One more, last, with the time. Yeah, time of birth, place of birth. Also, when you ask about time, we will basically also by default tell them the date, right? So date, time, place, three things that we say, right? So let's pick this up and use a modern astronomical software, right? And see how do you find a Rashi, right? Interesting. So I'm using something called as Stellarium here, right? I hope you can see it on the screen. Sky map. Just tell me yes or no. Is Stellarium visible on your screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. So this is Stellarium. Okay. So this gives us our live map, live sky map whenever you want it. It can go in the past. It works like a time machine. It can go in the past and it can go in the future also and show you how the sky is. Right. So let's try to find a Rashi. I'll use the case of my daughter, right? So first one, what we say, we want the place, right? So I picked up the place where she is born, right? And say use this location. Now on the right, I can set up the date, right? So I will pick up the date and right, and approximately the time is right. Again, exact time gives you the exact thing. I know for a fact this is there. And now, once you have set up the place, date, time, what we need to do is in the search bar there, find the moon. Where is it? Right? And select the moon. It will point you, show you the moon. So the last thing that you have to do is come down and switch on something called as constellations, right? So if you switch on the constellation, what happens is moon will be residing in one of the constellations, right? What is the constellation? Here, Leo, right? So my daughter is a Leo. She is a Simha Rashi, right? So if you want to do on your own, you can do this, right? So, and sometimes if you do get the moon in between the two Rashi, right? So zoom in and see whichever is the nearest one, you will get the approximate thing, right? So this is interesting, right? So we used a modern software and we can, all that we inputted is date, time, place, and found where the moon is, in which constellation the moon is. And that's the Rashi, right? So what did we now do is we started giving identity to a person, write horoscope. Now, how do you write your horoscope? At this moment of time, if you find different things, let's say if I find Jupiter, right? Where is Jupiter? Jupiter is in Capricorn, right? So now Guru is in the Makara Rashi, right? So what Jyotishis does is they start pointing all the grahas in the different rashis and give you a horoscope, right? And there is a way of interpreting if certain graha is in certain rashi, how is it to be predicted, right? So this is all that they are doing. So take an individual whenever they are born, right? Pick all the celestial objects in the sky and start giving an identity to it, right? So this is how an astronomy and a astrological aspect is intertwined, and we start now drawing out the charts of our life to it. Now, how do they predict what is what? There is a huge amount of literature that is there in Jyotish Shastra, which talks about different combinations to different outcomes, right? So that we will see in a minute. When we explore one of the samhitas, we see how that is also coming. But this is as simple as that, right? So look at the skies and associate the alignment of skies and celestial objects to you. What part of you? Either the birth, or people take different instances of your life and you say something happened at this time. So all that they do is go and plot out where are these, right? Now I did it with stellarium. How does our Jyotishis do it, right? They would have not used stellarium so far, right? Stellarium is for a common man usage now, right? So there is a way of writing this celestial alignments and calculating, because there is a pattern and the math, a lot of complicated math is involved, right? So if moon is moving at a certain speed, you could go and there are sky charts that you can draw, which comes as part of our panchangas, right? So any given date, time, and a coordinate, which is the place, right? You get to see where the moon is. So they had a ready reckoner, or they could calculate it at that moment. So if a Jyotishi is taking time and doing all the calculations, that's what that they are doing, right? So they try to get the star map alignment of that time and give you your horoscope, right? So that's how Jyotisha is there in our day-to-day life, right? So if we are talking now, we can reference this moment in Jyotisha aspect in a lot of stuff, right? In terms of how far, what is the tithi of the day, how far is the moon towards its from its journey from new moon to full moon, all that, right? So that is there. So we'll see in a minute. So this second aspect is Jyotisha helps you to set up a calendar, right? This is true for every civilization in the world. People started, moon location will define sunshine or moonshine. Moonshine, obviously. Sunshines are something that defines the in a different pattern, not as simple as just looking at where the sun was at that time, but there is a different logic in getting a sunshine, not like this, but this is the moonshine that we are talking about. We Indians are talking about moonshines, not sunshine. We'll see why. We'll see in a moment, right? Okay, so I was talking, when it comes to various civilizations, people started looking at the skies and they started preparing their calendars. So is with the Indian civilization. They were far more advanced compared to a lot of other civilizations, because they studied the night sky in far more depth than anyone else, right? So how did this calendar come into the picture? One, calendar defined what is our year, right? We follow something called as a lunisolar calendar, which means our calendar is dependent on both moon and sun, right? For a lot of aspects, we look at the moon, and for certain aspects, we look at the sun, right? So why? And there are pure solar calendars, and there are pure lunar calendars. For example, the Hijri calendar the Islam follows is a pure moon calendar, right? And there are pure solar calendars that a lot of Egyptians follow. Ours is, though there is, whenever someone says about Surya Siddhanta or something, they are still not proper sun, only sun-based calendars. Moon is always there. Why moon became a prominent aspect? 80% or 90% of the world follows either something, a combination of sun and moon, or purely moon. Why did why is the skew for only following the sun calendar? Any can you think of a logical reason? Straight logic is, when sun is there in the daytime, right, the brightness masks everything in the sky, right? So we cannot start predicting different movement of, we just know where is the sun at that point in the time. No, not closer to earth now. The thing is, we looking at the sun, we can just see the sun and its position in the sky, and it is very difficult to relate that position to something else because everything is bright. Whereas the moment you get into the night sky and keep the moon as the reference, there are a plethora of stars that you can correlate the moon's movement. That's how the constellations came into the picture. We started grouping stars into different shapes and different locations, and the way the moon moves across these constellation was simpler to correlate, right? That's how a lot of our logic depends on the moon moving across the star rather than the sun. Of course, later point of time when the math was solid, you could easily calculate where the sun is also moving across the stars without looking at the stars. But initially, the observational astronomy was solid during the night time. Whoever was interested in astronomy or an astrologer, right? The day, the so-called day starts when the night begins for them, right? So that's how the evolution of astronomy became. That's how the lunar calendars or lunisolar calendars were prominent, right? So what we follow as a Hindu calendar is a lunisolar calendar. Now, when there are two things involved, every aspect will be with reference to two things. So when we want to define a year, we have a Saura Varsha as well as Chandra Varsha, right? What does Saura Varsha constitute? It's the elapsed time for the sun to return to the same star, right? So sun coming from a particular star, if it comes back to that same star again, that completes 1 year, right? Which is nothing but a period of revolution of the earth around the sun. That is Saura Varsha, right? How is Chandra Varsha defined? So once we complete either 12 new moons or 12 full moons, right? Based on what people keep this as the reference, either the new moon or the full moon, there are a set of people who keep new moons as the references. There are certain set of people who keep full moons, right? So 12, either of them are elapsed. So you get a Chandra Varsha, right? So year is defined like that. So I have some geographical aspect here. So people from eastern states predominantly and Tamil Nadu, Kerala and partly Punjab and Haryana follow the Saura Varsha, right? And rest of the states, one of which I belong to, Karnataka, follows a Chandra Varsha predominantly, right? Again, it's just a convention. Both mathematics are sound, right? So they give out the right results only, right? So it's a different convention, right? So the lunar calendar, so no matter what, whether you follow a Saura Varsha or Chandra Varsha, lunar calendar is the one that is followed to fix all the auspicious times, that is the muhurtas, right? So that's there. What is months? Months are masas. There is Chandra Masa, that's the time between two new moons or two full moons. It has got two pakshas, which is Shukla Paksha and Krishna Paksha. Shukla Paksha is where it's a from Amavasya to Purnima. The one that we are in now today is a Shukla Paksha, right? The one that goes from Purnima to Amavasya, the 14 days of the 28 days moon cycle, is the Krishna Paksha, right? So when we define year, we talk about a Chandravarsha, then we talk about which Masa are we in, and we also talk about which fortnight in the Masa are we in, right? Whether we are in the Shukla Paksha fortnight or the Krishna Paksha fortnight. How are Masas there? Chaitra, Vaishakha, Jyeshtha, Ashada, we know, right? So they are, how they are named is also very interesting, right? Unlike months in an English calendar, which are named after their kings and the gods, and nothing related to the celestial alignment, our calendars, the definition of masas are very sound. How is a Chaitra? When do you call it a Chaitra Masa? That is when the moon is in the Chitra Nakshatra, right? So closer to Chitra Nakshatra constellation, that is Chaitra Masa, right? When the moon is in the Vishaka Nakshatra, that is Vaishakha, and so on. Jyeshtha Nakshatra, Ashada Nakshatra. Ashada, we have Uttarashada and Purvashada, right? So Shravana, then Bhadrapada Nakshatra, Ashwini Nakshatra, Shravana, right? So based on where the moon is, we get to name our month. Just not the moon, it is about where the full moon is there in that particular masa, right? So I slip of tongue, it's just not the moon. Moon goes across all nakshatras for sure. Where the full moon occurs in that month is the masa, right? So we have a clear masas, right? If you are a Saura Masa, definition is about sun moving from one zodiac to the other, ingress to ingress. That is, if Mesha, Risha, whatever is our Rashis are the Masas also in Saura based calendars, right? Perfect. So we will come to this after a while, right? So, okay, or we will cover it straight away, right? So our panchangas have 5 components, right? So when we are talking about calendar, what we call our panchanga has Tithi, Nakshatra, Vara, Karna, and Yoga, right? If you find 5 of these for a particular epoch, right, you are giving a precise timing of a moment, right? So Tithi gives a broader time, Nakshatra makes it a more specific, Vara is again, Karna and Yoga is going more specific. Vara is a broader term which was added at the later part, right? So what's a Tithi? So simple. In how did we start naming the Tithis is on Amavasya, right? So if you look at the sun and the moon, when the sun and moon are together, right? So that is called Amavasya, right? Ama is together, Vasya is together. Sun and moon are together. So when you look at in the sky and the moment when the moon and sun are together, right? That is the difference between the degree of the sun and the moon. What is the degree we are talking about? When we look at the sky, we can have an angular degree between 2 objects, right? When one object is right at your zenith is, and one object at the horizon, that's a 90-degree difference between the 2 objects, right? So when you say sun and moon and a degree difference between them on our celestial sphere, which is our sky, right? We can define a Tithi, right? So it starts with the Amavasya, which is a 0 difference between sun and moon. They are together, right? So when the degree difference between sun and moon crosses 12 degrees, right? That's when the first Tithi arrives, which is the Pratama Tithi, right? Or Pratipat, right? So 12, and between 12 and 24, we have Dvitiya, and so on, right? So if I have to give you a Tithi cutoff, right? 0 to 12 is Amavasya in a Shukla Paksha, right? So we had Amavasya recently on a Saturday or Sunday, right? So from 0 to 12 degrees. So if you open up stellarium, you can also do that. Calculate the degree of the sun and moon, and if the difference is between 0 to 12, it is still Amavasya Tithi, right? So the moment it is reaching 12, the Pratipat starts up to 24, and from 24, Dvitiya, Tritiya, Chaturthi, Panchmi, Shashti, Saptami, Ashtami, Navami, Dashmi. Then there is an Ekadashi, Dwadashi, Trayodashi, Chaturdashi, and then comes Purnima, which is exact 180 degrees. So which is sun and moon will be on the opposites on that day, right? The sun is setting and the moon is rising, right, on a Purnima, right? So then going forward, it repeats between 180 onwards again, all 14 tithis come back. Now at 360 degrees, which is 0 again, right? So from 0 to 360 is nothing but can be marked as 0. It's again Amavasya, right? So you see how our tithis are mapped with respect to the angular distances of a celestial object. We are talking about sound astronomy here, right? So that's how a tithi comes in between a day. We talk about a lot of times in our Panchanga saying today at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the tithi changed from Dvitiya to Tritiya. That's because the angular distances do not rely on whether it is a sunrise or a sunset. It's not following a day and night. We are talking about the angular distances. That's how the tithis change during a day also. You can have 2 tithis in a single day, right? So that's how you calculate a tithi, right? Then Karna is half the tithi, right? Among the Panchanga, the next one, the Karna is half the tithi, which means it gives you a lot more precision, which is you are not talking about 12 degrees, we are talking about 6 degrees now, right? So based on 6 degrees, there are different total of 60 Karnas, right? Then we have Nakshatra, right? So we have ecliptic, which is from horizon to horizon. What we see, like the 360 degrees are divided by 27 equal parts, which gives us around 800 minutes when we talk. So each nakshatra spans for 800 minutes in the sky, right? We are not talking about the time minutes, but the angular minutes. 1 degree is converted to 60 minutes. 1 degree angular distance is nothing but 60 minutes, such that 800 minutes constitute one nakshatra, right? That's how, if you were again, common phenomena is when you go to a temple and you are doing archana to God and you say your Rashi, the Purohita there automatically guesses your nakshatra. How is that? Because a Rashi is associated with a predominant set of nakshatras, right? So when I say I am a Sagittarius or a Dhanur Rashi, the first 4 aspects of that is Mula Nakshatra, right? So he might ask me, Mula, Purvashada, Uttarashada, what is it, right? So he can refine it to one of them, right? So nakshatras are a lot more refinement of a time, right? When we say tithi is a full day, if we call tithi as a day, karna as half a day, right, which means gives a multiple. Nakshatra is a lot more refinement of that, right, and so on, right? So we talk about yoga. Yoga is an addition, so there is a calculation of yoga as well. So any given point in time, you can talk about Vara of the Panchanga is a modern addition. It is supposed to have come after the Roman calendar has come in, right? To give it a, what we call it as Somavara, Mangalavara, and so on. If you observe the dating, if you look at it, the Romans have named it first, Monday, Tuesday, and all that. Monday is dedicated to moon, right? And our Somavara, Soma is our moon. Tuesday is Mars for Romans, right? In the Roman calendar. And Mangala is our Mars again, right? So there is a lot of argument that the first mention of Vara is after the Roman calendar and it's a later addition, right? So again, the discussions go on. So that's how a calendar system is so much sound to astronomy also when we talk about our day-to-day life. So when I say Jyotisha now, you should not start thinking about your horoscope and the future and all that. We are talking about a calendar. We are talking about associating the time of your birth to the planetary alignments, right? So we are talking about some astronomy now, right? How are we substantiating now? That's the next part. Let's start looking at some of the prominent works in Jyotisha, right? In the next 10 to 15 minutes, we will do this, right? So the oldest work in Jyotisha is supposed to be the Vedanga Jyotisha, a copy of it, the picture of which I have put it on the slide. So this is attributed to sage Lagada. And what is the period of it? It is supposed to be somewhere around 1500 BC. Some people say it as 1400. It goes, the dating goes up to 400 BC also, right? But there are references in the shloka, I mean verses of Vedanga Jyotisha, that is which points it, how does it intelligently give the dating is, it talks about different planetary alignments. So if you pick up an astronomy software and try to go back in time and put up that planetary alignments, the dating will come somewhere up around 1550 BC. So if they say moon was in certain constellation when Jupiter was here, there are only very few combinations of this happening in the night sky, right? And you can go and check at the dating of this. Varsha are based on the planet, subset of Navagraha known at that time, discounting the Rahu Ketu, which are not planets and only imaginary points in space where the yes, of course, that's it. Rahu and Ketu, there is a different way how beautifully Bhaskaracharya puts the Rahu and Ketus. He walks a tightrope where he does not say they are not planets, even also substantiating the importance of the nodal points of importance in astronomy. Yes, you are also, your explanation is also on in terms with Varsha is also there, right? So yeah, getting back, Vedanga Jyotisha, as I said, the period is that, and how big is it? There are two versions of Vedanga Jyotisha. There is a Rigvedic version and then a Yajurvedic version, right? So the Rigvedic version has as less as 36 verses in it, right? And the Yajurvedic version has a 43 verses. Again, the Yajurvedic version does not differ predominantly from Rigvedic version in a way that 30 verses are same from Rigvedic. Only the 13 verses are the additions, right? So what does the contents of the book talk, right? So what is the contents of Vedanga Jyotisha? If I have to read it directly from the book, it talks about the yuga, that is a group of 5 years, right? So this is the, if you should understand, in 1550 BC. In a moment, we will see a chronology of all the astronomical works in comparison to the Western works also, and then we will identify the timing of it. We are talking about a 1550 BC, right? And there, the sage has made an attempt to clearly define about grouping of years, that is a yuga, as 5 years is supposed to be a yuga as per the Vedanga Jyotisha. And he talks about an year, a month, that is Masa, a Tithi, right? He talks about the Ritu, the seasons, the Nakshatras, of course, and then he goes on to talk about the eclipses, their calculations. A lot of mathematics is already coming in 1550 BC. We need to identify the time also. So he talks about various time definitions, right? And 1 second, I'm looking at one particular page. Where are the bookmarks? Yeah, so it goes on to talk about various alignments of planets. It also gives a rough hint of a rough hint that we are wrong in the conception of Surya Chandra moving around us, right? It does not directly say, but it says it is what we see in the sky is not what actually is. The one that we see from our eyes is an illusion, and we can just keep this for observational astronomy, but we cannot. The books goes on to claim that we cannot establish that this is the reality when we see from outside the purview of where we are standing on the ground. It goes to that extent in saying that the geocentric model is not acceptable, right? So we are talking about 1550 BC here, right? So in terms of contribution from Vedanga Jyotisha, it is very predominantly contributes in terms of time divisions, right? It gives specific divisions. It talks about what is a Varsha, and this is the first definition where we see about a year, a month, and a Tithi and a Nakshatra, right? So that's Vedanga Jyotisha, right? I'll post the content and the part. We will move on to a much more sophisticated work, right? So we have heard about Aryabhata a lot, but what did he do, right? So he has composed two works. One is Aryabhatiya and Aryabhatiya Siddhanta, Aryabhata Siddhanta, right? So Aryabhatiya is, like we discussed the last session, we talked about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, right? It is as aphorism as the Yoga Sutras, right? It has Aryabhatiya has like 4 parts, right? And it also terms it as Pada, like we had in the Yoga Sutras, right? So the 4 parts, which are Geetika Pada, right? It has 13 verses only, right? It talks about cosmology and time measurement. It talks about the rotation of the earth, the motion of the rotation of the earth on its axis, right? That's a huge contribution from Aryabhatiya, right? So then we talk about the planetary motions, right? Geocentric model is somewhat proposed in Aryabhatiya, and we talk about the measurement of time, and the next part is about the Ganita Pada, which is 33 verses, which talks about the mathematics, the number system, right? So the base 10 number system, the place value systems, right? So we will see in a moment. We'll open up the text and see. Then there is a Kalakriya Pada, which is about time calculation. How do you calculate it? Time measurement is one, and then the calculation is what we talk about. Here we talk about the zodiacs and the months, the rules for determining the eclipses and things like that. And finally, we have the Gola Pada, which is 50 verses. It talks about the spherical astronomy and the geometry by itself, right? So we will quickly look at Aryabhatiya. So on my screen, I've got a copy, translated copy of Aryabhatiya, right? So where, if you look at the contents of the work, right? So it starts with the introduction to author. This is, of course, a commentary. So it talks about the time, where he was, what was his time, who were his pupils, and what other works that Aryabhata has written. So the initial part of the Aryabhatiya is that. Then it goes on to talking about the contents where it actually starts, right? So one is about so if you look at it, it talks about the alphabetical system of numeral notation, right? So if you have heard of encryption through Katapayadi, right, which is a popular encryption method for words using numbers, right? Aryabhatiya has his own version of his time, which is a lot more sophisticated version than the Katapayadi is. So this is about associating a number with a letter, right? And encode your message using the numbers. And the one who understands his encryption can decrypt and get a text out of it, right? So he does that, right? So theory of Earth's rotation is there. the predominant contribution is about the sine table, right? So he gives a complete sine table as part of these verses, right? Formula for sine theta when theta is greater than pi by 2 and things like that. So this is complex mathematics we're talking about. And look at the sophistication of the work. Again, I cannot go into each of these sections. I'll be sharing the link to access this entire copy for yourself. Go to section by section and look at the beauty of it, right? Look at the complexity. So what the text does is it has got a verse in Sanskrit, then its translation and a commentary. So I'll pick up a random verse here, right? And we talk about, so there is a Sanskrit verse, there is a translation, and there is a commentary from different people involved in giving a commentary to this work, right? So that's about the Aryabhatiya work. It has 4 parts. So if you have to just remember what it's talks about, it's as simple as memorizing close to around 75, 108 and 111, 121 verses approximately. If you memorize, right, each verse of around 2 lines, which we are talking about 250 lines of Sanskrit, if you memorize, the entire Aryabhatiya is with you. That's the power of the aphorism and the verse-based works like the Yoga Sutras and the works like Aryabhatiya, right? So moving on, right? Now we look at one of the, so if Aryabhatiya is a kind of a Siddhantic work which focuses on more of a astronomy aspect than the astrology aspect. It talks about complex math to calculate positions, right? Remember, how did this come from? We are just talking about a Vedic verse talking about doing a particular ritual at a particular time in a particular direction, right? That's how the entire Jyotisha evolved from the requirement of that, right? So the next work that we have picked up is a work from a Samhita section, right? So the threefold Jyotisha we talk about, Siddhanta, Samhita, right? So what Samhita does is, it's unlike an Aryabhatiya, it's not a small 121 verse where you can write a commentary and expand it. It is an extensive work. It's an encyclopedic work of 106 chapters, right? So we will, and what does it talk about? It talks about astronomy for sure. It talks about sun, moon and all that. It talks about astrology also, correlating sun, moon to our life. And it talks about, we will see the contents. I will not talk more, right? We'll see what it talks about, right? So it starts with something called the astrologer. What does this mean? The Brihat Samhita of Varahamiracharya talks about what are the qualities of an astrologer is, right? What works he should have studied and what are the skills that is required. What are his day-to-day rituals that he needs to perform, right? And eventually ends up advising a king of a kingdom, right? Or a head of a state on selecting an astrologer for his kingdom, right? So if a king wants to keep a chief Jyotishi, how should he interview him? What all he should check from an astrologer? So the Samhita talks about verses about that, right? So what then it talks about sun, moon, Rahu, then the different planets here, right? Agastya, then the 7 sages. 7 sages is the Saptarishi Mandala that we know about. So it talks about their placement, how do they contribute to our day-to-day life, what do we base them on, what does the Saptarishi Mandala usually help us in finding in navigations and all that, right? So it goes on and on to a point where it talks about stuff like pregnancy of clouds. What does this mean? I am particularly interested in this. So let's quickly pick about that part about the pregnancy of the cloud. Right. So here it is, pregnancy of the cloud. The entire book is like this, where you have the Sanskrit verse, right? The shloka followed by its translation and what it means, right? So what does the pregnancy of cloud talk about? It introduces the importance of water, which is, as food is the elixir of life, right? Food is dependent on the monsoon. So you should know how the clouds are formed, right? So what does that mean is, it goes on, talks about how there is a Garga Samhita and Parashara Tantra, which are also encyclopedic work like Brihad Samhita. He picks up those references and talks about what is it. So initial 6-7 shlokas are all about how the cloud is formed. Symptoms of pregnancies are to be detected when the moon transits Purva Shada, is the or the first day of Margashira. So it gives a timing now when the moon is transiting Purva Shada Nakshatra, commencing from the first day of Margashira. That's when the pregnancy of the cloud starts. It's a beautiful literature where the clouds birth to the point where it rains and delivers, right? So that's compared to pregnancy and analogy, and that's been explained here, right? So it talks about going forward from 7th shloka. It talks about the fetus, which is the raindrop, right? Formed. So the characteristics of how, if the cloud is formed in certain time, how are the characteristics of this raindrop? When does it rain? So it talks about the 195 days, right? So when the moon stays in a particular asterism is a constellation, the shape that we collectively have the stars, right? So will be born 195 days, right? So the moon standing again in the same asterism according to the laws of a revolution. So the moon from its asterism after 195 days comes back to the same asterism. That's when the fetus delivers, right? So it goes on and on. It talks about different characteristics of cloud, the colors of the cloud. I have something. So good symptoms at the time of conception of the clouds are how? So a cool breeze under certain directions. So I'll share the link. Go through it. It's a beautiful set of verses, and if you look at it, the flow is such that the cloud forms and the rains, all of it with respect to different astronomical significance is explained as part of this Samhita, right? So Brihad Samhita talks about not just about the astronomy, and again at the later part of the Samhita talks about the how, when do you go and mine in a mining, when do you mine a particular metal, right? So the Samhita is now associating astrology, the astronomical alignment, bringing astrology to our day-to-day works, right? And advises you based on patterns when to do what. So the Brihad Samhita is all about it. It also talks about, to an extent of omens, right? So if you are in a place where there are a lot of crows, right? So on the cries of crows is a chapter, right? So how do you interpret the crows cawing, right? What type of cawing relates to what type of prediction, right? Also, there is an interesting section where it gives us the characteristics of an earthquake. When does an earthquake happen, right? So go through it. It's an interesting work. So as I said, it is of 100 and in this part, there are 106. This is a Roman numeral, C is 100, 6 is the chapters, right? So there are 106 chapters talking about different aspects of astronomy, astrology, and our day-to-day lives, right? Science of men, science of elements. So amazing work in terms of that, right? So finally, we will move on to the so-called crown jewel of this entire astronomical works, is the Siddhanta Shiromani, right? This is by Bhaskaracharya too. This comes from refining all the previous works of Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, and Varahamira, right? So all their works So obviously this has come in a later stages of time period. This is more of the recent works, right? But this is also more of a sophisticated, more scientific work, right? So like anything else, this is also of 4 parts, right? So the first part is named as Leelavati. It's named after Bhaskara's daughter, they say, but it talks a lot about mathematics, right? So a copy of Leelavati is with me. Amazing work, right? If you read through it, it's like a story, right? So this is filled with questionnaire in the sense that Bhaskaracharya is teaching his daughter, who is named Leelavati, right? By teaching her all the basic arithmetic operations, the geometry, the at the end of the story, right? At the end of this section, Leelavati is a learned daughter who understands all of it. And he goes on to say, whoever marries Leelavati is going to be prosperous in their life because she understands a major aspect of Jyotisha, which is the core mathematics of day-to-day life, right? So then the second part is the Bijaganita, which is algebra, right? So if the first part also talks a little about algebra, but the second part is an advanced algebra where he talks about the positive, negative numbers, the algebraic identities, solution of equations, and so on, right? So the third part is the Grahaganita, right? So Grahaganita talks about the astronomical computations. Then the Goladhyaya is beyond the, it's about the celestial world, right? So beyond the earth as a reference, if we talk about spherical geometry and stuff like that, so that's part of the Goladhyaya, right? So if we quickly, if I have to give you a, so Leelavati is one part, right? I don't have a copy of Bijaganita either in soft or anything. I'll figure out, right? So then I've got the Siddhanta Shiromani of the third and fourth part, which is the Grahaganita and Goladhyaya, where if you look at the contents, it talks about something called Adimasadi Nirnaya, right? So when we are following the lunisolar calendar, we are when we have moon for calculation of months, right? So we know for a fact that if we get the total number of days, there is a difference in the number of days in a year based on the moon and a sun, right? So you get a differential days every year, right? And eventually you miss the alignment of sun and moon. So we have a convention of adding a something called as Adimasa or Adhikamasa, which we have recently concluded. The last Masa was Adhikamasa, right? So Bhaskaracharya talks about the calculation of how the Adhikamasa is to be introduced. At what point? Conventionally, we say it comes once in 2.5 years, right? There is a convention of adding a different number once in 4 years also. But how is that to be done is what Bhaskaracharya talks here. He talks about lunar eclipses, calculating different eclipses, right? So then he talks about different planetary motions, different alignments, conjunctions that we talk about today, occultations that we talk about today. Conjunctions are where two celestial objects are in close proximity, right? We see in our Instagram reels and everywhere that sun is close to Jupiter, sun is close to Mars on this full moon or whatever is the moon phase, right? So those are called conjunctions. What are occultations? Occultations are a celestial body passing through another celestial body are those are called transits. We talk about Venus transits, right? Venus passing over the sun, right? So that is Venus transit. So he talks about all of that. So this work, if we think about it, we are talking about around 1500 CE here, right? So we'll quickly see when did it came. So, but this is the subject matter of Siddhanta Shiromani, right? So it starts with the arithmetic maths, gets into algebraic maths, and then goes into the planetary motions and so on, right? So the calculation of pi is also been redetermined from Aryabhatta, refined here by Bhaskaracharya. Again, Aryabhatta gave the calculation of pi in one of the verses, right? Much closer approximation than the Ptolemy's approximation in times of that, right? So this is how these works are there. So the more you study, it is beyond my scope to cover the specific contents, but I can share you all of the links to these works, right? Go through them, read one small section, and you will understand how significant they are of their times, right? So to understand that, before we go forward, let's think about how did they even calculate about it, right? So they used to use different tools or instruments, right? So in the modern times, to look at these instruments, one king did the greatest of all time works, right? That he built monument around these instruments. So these were monuments which were observatories by themselves, right? So who was this king? Any idea? And what were these monuments? Monuments are obviously the Jantar Mantar, right? And there is no one Jantar Mantar. There were five. There are five of them. One of them is again missing. The king is Jai Singh again, right? He built five Jantar Mantars, right? Delhi, Ujjain, Mathura. Mathura one is lost. Jaipur, and one other place, right? So why did he build five? Obviously, in astronomy, it is about precision, right? He wanted to build the precise observatory one after the other, right? If the Delhi one or the Mathura one was the oldest one, the Jaipur and Ujjain were built parallelly in time, right? And the Jaipur's one that we have now is a masterpiece, right? So if you happen to be in Jaipur, right, more than Hawa Mahal, go to the Jantar Mantar of Jaipur. It's an amazing place, right? And don't forget to get a guide, because without a guide, you cannot understand the instruments in depth. The guides are really good. And I've got a book from Jaipur Jantar Mantar only. So this is talking about what are these Jantar Mantars again, right? They have different yantras or tools used to measure various aspects of celestial time, right? So I've listed few of them. I've listed a lot of yantras. All of those in detail are here, right? So to pick up a few, there is obviously the Samrat Yantra, which is the supreme instrument, which is about, it's a big sundial. It's the largest instrument in these observatories. So its purpose is to measure the local time of the day, right? So based on the shadow of the triangular gnomon, right? So it travels equidistances in equal times, and you can predict the day, local time of the day. What is the local time for that particular place, right? So that is the Samrat Yantra that people used to measure time, what time of the day it is, right? So then the other one, if I can talk about, is the Digamsha Yantra, right? So Digamsha Yantra is a pillar in the center. Again, it gives the azimuth of the sun, right? Which means it gives a mathematical value of where the azimuth, we have altitude and azimuth, right? So those are the one way to look at the sky, right? And there's an equatorial way and there's an alt azimuth we call. So azimuth is the lateral position of the sun. So Digamsha Yantra gives you that, right? And finally, there's I can talk about something called Yantra Raja, right? King of instruments, right? This is the unique It's the jewel of Jaipur's Jantar Mantar. It's something called as an astrolabe that we know in our modern days, right? It's a bronze astrolabe, a circular disc made of bronze, and there is a pole star, and then from the pole star there is a markings on that astrolabe, which gives you a complete celestial picture of the night sky of that place, right? So it's a it's a predecessor of something called planisphere that we use today, and stellarium is a live planisphere. What we saw here, right? So if I look at the night sky, how was my night sky? Right? So astrolabe gives you this, right? So if you imagine an astrolabe, given point in time, which constellations are in which positions, and where is sun, where is moon. So this is in the modern day we call it planisphere. What is Yantra Raja does is that it's a predecessor to our modern planisphere, right? So these are astronomical monuments and yantras. Finally, we will conclude today's sessions with some of the contemporary works. We compare the Western and Eastern works to appreciate what we have seen so far, right? So Vedanga Jyotisha, right? 1400 to 1200 BC. Okay, sorry, the slide was not on the screen. Okay, so Vedanga Jyotisha was 1400 to 1200, right? And of the similar times in 700 BC is the works and days, right? It's the observational calendar with constellation-based markers. This is a work in Western astronomy, right? So observe the color codes, right? So the one in the orangish color is the Indian work, and the one in the gray is the Western work, right? So going forward, there was Ptolemy's work that came in 150 Common Era, that is 150 AD, right? Then the Aryabhatiya came in the 5th century Common Era, right? Look at the works that follow, right? So there's Panchasiddhantika by Varamira, there's Brihad Samhita, then there is Brahmasputa Siddhanta by Brahmagupta, Surya Siddhanta, followed by Siddhanta Shiromani of Bhaskaracharya that we saw, right? So if you look at it, between the after AD part, which the start of Common Era, up to a point where it is the 10th century or 1150 Common Era, the Indian works were predominantly there. There was no prominent Western work talking about astronomy at all, right? If there was anything, there was a calendrical work of 700 BC, and then there was a Ptolemy's work, which has its own reservations about the wrong predictions, right? They had a geocentric model with apparent stars and planetary motion, but Indian works, Siddhantic works were progressing across the time period, and we had the complex math-backed works during that period. Then what happened? Look at it, right? Starting post the Siddhantic tradition, right? After Siddhanta Shiromani also, there were a couple of predominant works, but then the Western works started taking over. Why? If you look at the time period, you can observe a predominant timeline where India was coming under the attack of the the Islamic rulers, right? And eventually the Western, the British and the Portuguese and the French and the Dutch were stationing here, right? So the Indian way of education and Indian literature was being compressed or did not come to the light, right? And interestingly, what was happening in the Western world is the modern Renaissance, right? So where the likes of Copernicus, the Galileos came into the picture, the telescope was discovered, which changed the entire map of astronomy to the Western world compared to the Eastern world for India and China, right? Telescope, right, changed the way people started looking at the sky, right? So we started discovering moons, we started having a lot more practical backed theories, right? So India, at the same time, Indian Jyotisha was in the fall, right? So the Indians were taken over by the invasions, right? And the works did not come to the light. We started losing our traditions. We started losing our places of interest. Our universities like Ujjain and Nalanda, which were the workhorses of astronomy, started getting destroyed, and so on, right? And Western astronomy eventually prevailed, and they started becoming predominant, right? So if you look at that, and here and there we had the Kerala school of Somyaji bringing in more complex mathematical works, but again we were way beyond by that time. That's how the overall landscape of the astronomy perspective of Jyotisha came in. What prevailed now is the way we look Jyotisha, sadly, the way we look Jyotisha as astrology only, right? So we lost the complete astronomical significance of what we had, right? So all that was lost because of the time period and the suppression that we were through, and the Arabic and the Western world deriving from our Siddhantic works, started establishing more practical backed works, and we did not rise at all in terms of Jyotisha. So if we go back, so what was happening post-independent era and during the independence struggle in the recent 19th centuries were the likes of J.C. Bose, were the likes of Ramanjunas, where the mathematics were taken to their next levels, again under the purview of Cambridge and Oxfords of Britain, right? So that's what was happening. Now, if we go back and look at our Siddhantic texts, right, especially the Siddhanta Shiromani, so if we look at the recent works of Surya Siddhanta, Siddhanta Shiromani, and Brahmasputra Siddhanta type of works, and even Aryabhatiya, right? So there is a sound astronomy that we can derive also now, right? We can create new commentaries. We can try to verify there with our modern astronomy also. That's the intention of presenting today's astronomical perspective to you, right? So that brings us to the end, right? So in the what we did today was in the last 90 minutes, we embarked on a brief journey through the vast landscape of Jyotisha, right? So right from the philosophical depth of Veda and rituals of Veda, the need for timekeeping, predicting, and the need for the direction, how it evolved into a complex mathematical backed astronomical treatises like Siddhanta works, right? So that's how the Jyotisha evolved over time, and we have a treasure of it, right, lying around in our with access to us, right, which we need to go back and dive deeper a bit, right? And we can derive a lot of modern day stuff, right? So again, what are we doing? That's a wrap. And what do we do next is, I am not very skeptical. These are the old dates. Not very skeptical about the future session because of the festives coming over. I will eventually announce the next date and the next topic. But there is something exciting that I'll be announcing in a day or two, right? So let's not stop this venture into different fields, getting into the gateway of various works of Indian astronomical system, and let's focus on something that we can do together, right? So thanks for being here today. So post this session, what I'll be doing is I'll be sharing all the links to the works that I talked about today, right? There is another important work which gives you a summary of which work to refer to for what purposes, right? So you can do that, and we will see you again soon. Thank you. So if you have something to post in the comments or questions, post it and I'll be able to happy to answer to you.